The ER doors slammed open, and the scream of sirens drowned out the world. Dr. Elias Carter, his scrubs stained with the day's battles, didn't flinch, never did. But tonight, something in his chest tightened, a secret clawing its way out after 15 years of silence. Elias had seen it all in Chicago's Mercy General: gunshot wounds, overdoses, mothers clutching stillborn dreams. He was the anchor in the storm, the doctor who could suture a wound with one hand while calming a panicked family with the other. At 45, his dark hair was streaked with gray, his hazel eyes carrying the weight of countless lives save Dan lost. But no one in the hospital knew the real Elias, the man who went home to an empty apartment, where the only sound was the hum of his regrets. It was 7:32 p.m. On a biting November evening in 2025, and the ER was a battlefield. Elias moved like a conductor, directing nurses, barking orders, his voice steady even as his pulse raced. A teenage girl, barely conscious, was wheeled in car accident, internal bleeding. Elias didn't hesitate. "Get me a trauma panel. Stat," he shouted, his hands already on her, searching for a pulse. The girl's mother sobbed nearby, and Elias caught her eye, offering a nod that said, "I've got this." He always did. But tonight, something was off. Nurse Javier Morales, 28, noticed it first. Javier was new to Mercy General, a transplant from Miami with a quick smile and a knack for reading people. He'd only been at the hospital for 6 months, but he'd already earned a reputation for his relentless optimism and sharp instincts. His dark curls bounced as he darted between patients, his brown eyes catching every detail. And tonight, he saw it. Elias's hands trembled, just for a second, as he stitched up the girl's lacerated arm. "Dr. Carter, you okay?" Javier asked, his voice low, meant only for Elias. They stood shoulder to shoulder at the trauma bay. The girl stabilized, her mother now holding her hand. Elias froze, his jaw tightening. No one ever asked him that. Not in 15 years. "I'm fine, Morales," Elias said, his tone clipped, but his eyes betrayed him flickering with something raw, unguarded. Javier didn't push, but he filed it away, his gut telling him there was more to the story. The night wore on, relentless. A heart attack patient coded at 9:15. A toddler with a fever spiked at 10:03. Elias moved through it all, his calm a beacon for the staff. But Javier watched him closely, catching the way Elias lingered by the girl's bedside after she was moved to recovery, his fingers brushing the chart like it was a lifeline. By midnight, the ER had quieted, and Javier found Elias in the break room, staring at a cold cup of coffee. "You sure you're good, Doc?" Javier pressed, leaning against the counter. His voice was gentle, but his eyes were sharp, searching. Elias looked up, and for a moment, the mask slipped. "You ever feel like you're carrying something no one else can see?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Javier nodded, his own secrets tucked deep. He'd grown up in a family where being openly gay meant being disowned. He'd learned to hide, to laugh off questions about girlfriends, to keep his heart locked away. But something about Elias's question hit him hard, like a key turning in a rusty lock. Before Javier could respond, the intercom crackled. "Dr. Carter, Trauma Bay, now." Elias was gone in an instant, his coffee untouched, his question hanging in the air. The next few hours were a blur. A multi-car pileup on the I-90 brought in 6 patients, and Elias was everywhere intubating, ordering scans, consoling families. Javier worked alongside him, their movements synchronized, a silent rhythm born of necessity. But Javier couldn't shake the feeling that Elias was unraveling, his usual precision fraying at the edges. At 3 a.m., the ER finally stilled. Elias slipped into the staff lounge, his hands shaking as he pulled a small envelope from his locker. His name was scrawled on it in his own handwriting, the ink smudged from years of being carried, untouched. He'd written it a decade ago, a confession meant for no one or maybe everyone. He hadn't decided yet. Javier found him there, the envelope clutched in Elias's hand. "What's that?" Javier asked, his voice soft but insistent. Elias looked at him, really looked at him, and something broke. "It's who I am," he said, his voice cracking. "And I've been too scared to let it out." Javier's heart pounded. He knew that fear, had lived it. But before he could speak, Elias handed him the envelope and walked away, leaving Javier standing alone, the weight of the letter burning in his hands. Javier stood frozen, the envelope trembling in his hands. The lounge was dim, the hum of the vending machine the only sound breaking the silence. He wanted to run after Elias, to demand answers, but the weight of the letter held him in place, as if it carried the gravity of 15 years. He tore it open, careful not to rip the fragile paper inside. The words were written in black ink, the handwriting tight and deliberate, like Elias had poured his soul into every stroke. To the staff of Mercy General, it began. Javier's breath caught. This wasn't just for him, this was for everyone. "My name is Elias Carter, and for 15 years, I've lied to you all. Not with words, but with silence. I've let you believe I'm someone I'm not, because I was afraid. Afraid of what you'd think, what you'd say, what it would cost me. I'm gay. I've always been. And I've spent my life hiding it, because I thought it was the only way to survive." Javier's eyes stung as he read, his heart hammering. He could feel Elias's fear, his shame, his longing, in every word. The letter went on, detailing moments small, searing ones where Elias had wanted to be himself but couldn't. A colleague's wedding he'd attended alone, dodging questions about a partner. A patient who'd thanked him for saving their life, not knowing he went home to an empty bed, too scared to love openly. The weight of it all, carried for a decade and a half, spilled onto the page. Javier sank into a chair, the letter trembling in his hands. He thought of his own life, the way he'd learned to smile through lies, to laugh off his family's expectations. He'd come out to a few friends in Miami, but here in Chicago, he was still half-hidden, cautious, always watching his words. Elias's confession felt like a mirror, reflecting his own unspoken truths. He tucked the letter into his pocket and headed back to the ER. Elias was at the nurse's station, charting, his face a mask of calm. But Javier saw the cracks now, the way his shoulders hunched, the way his eyes darted away from contact. He wanted to say something, anything, but the ER wasn't the place. Not yet. The night dragged on, each patient a new wave in the endless tide. Javier and Elias worked side by side, their silence heavier now, charged with the secret Javier carried. At 5 a.m., a young man came in, battered and bruised, his partner hovering anxiously nearby. The partner, a wiry guy with tear-streaked cheeks, clutched the patient's hand, whispering, "You're gonna be okay, babe." Javier saw Elias pause, his eyes lingering on the couple, a flicker of something envy, maybe, or regret crossing his face. "Dr. Carter, need you for a consult," Javier said, pulling Elias aside. It was a pretext, and they both knew it. In the quiet of an empty exam room, Javier faced him. "I read it," he said, his voice low. "Why now? Why give it to me?" Elias's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the floor. Because I'm tired. Javier. Tired of hiding. Tired of being half a person. I don't know if I'm ready for the world to know, but I needed someone to see me. Javier's throat tightened. He wanted to reach out, to tell Elias he wasn't alone, but the words caught. Instead, he said, "You're not invisible. Not to me." Elias looked up, his eyes searching Javier's face. For a moment, the air between them crackled, unspoken possibilities hanging like smoke. But the moment shattered when the intercom buzzed, calling Elias back to the trauma bay. The rest of the shift was a grind, but Javier couldn't stop thinking about the letter. He saw Elias in a new light now, every gesture, every glance, heavy with the weight of his secret. When their shift ended at 7 a.m., Javier caught Elias in the parking lot, the dawn light casting long shadows across the asphalt. "Elias, wait," Javier called, jogging to catch up. "What happens now?" "With the letter?" Elias stopped, his breath visible in the cold air. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've carried it so long. I don't know how to let it go." "Then don't," Javier said, his voice fierce. "But don't carry it alone." Elias's eyes softened, a flicker of hope breaking through. For the first time in years, he felt seen not as the unflappable doctor, but as himself. The hospital hummed with its usual chaos, but for Javier, the world had shifted. The letter in his pocket felt like a live wire, buzzing with Elias's truth. He couldn't stop replaying their conversation in the parking lot, the way Elias's voice had cracked, the way his eyes had held a quiet plea. Javier wanted to help, but he didn't know how, not yet. Back at his apartment, Javier reread the letter, each word cutting deeper. Elias had written about his childhood in rural Ohio, where different was a dirty word. He'd known he was gay since he was 12, but his father's belt and his mother's silence taught him to bury it. Medical school had been a refuge, a place to channel his pain into purpose. But even there, he'd stayed guarded, letting no one close. Mercy General was supposed to be his fresh start, but the fear followed him, a shadow he couldn't shake. Javier's own story wasn't so different. Growing up in Miami's Little Havana, he'd learned to dodge his abuela's questions about marriage, to laugh off his cousin's teasing. He'd come out to his sister once, in a tearful late-night call, but she'd begged him to keep it quiet for the family's sake. So he had, moving to Chicago to start over, hoping to find a place where he could breathe. Meeting Elias, seeing his struggle, made Javier realize how much he'd been holding his own breath. At the hospital, Javier watched Elias from a distance. The doctor was as steady as ever, guiding the ER through its daily storms. But now Javier noticed the small things, the way Elias avoided personal questions, the way he lingered alone in the break room, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. Javier wanted to bridge the gap, but the ER was a relentless machine, leaving little room for anything but survival. One evening, a week after the letter, the ER was slammed again. A flu outbreak had packed the waiting room, and tempers were fraying. Elias was in the middle of it, directing triage, when a patient's broth-era burly man with a red face started shouting, "You people don't care. My brother's dying, and you're just standing there." Elias stayed calm, his voice even. "Sir, we're doing everything we can. Let me check on him now." But the man wasn't having it. He shoved Elias hard, sending him stumbling against a cart. The room froze, nurses and patients watching in stunned silence. Javier was there in an instant, stepping between them. "Back off," he said, his voice low but firm. The man glared but retreated, muttering under his breath. Elias straightened, brushing off the incident. But Javier saw the shake in his hands. In the break room later, Javier cornered him. "You can't keep doing this, Elias. Acting like nothing gets to you." Elias sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's my job, Javier. I don't get to fall apart." "But you're human," Javier shot back. "And you're carrying too much. That letter, it's not just words. It's you. Let me help." Elias looked at him, his guard slipping. "How?" he asked, his voice raw. "How do I start being someone I've never been?" Javier didn't have an answer. Not yet. But he reached out, his hand brushing Elias's arm, a small gesture that felt like a promise. "We figure it out together," he said. The moment lingered, heavy with possibility, until a nurse burst in, calling them back to the fray. But something had shifted. Elias wasn't alone anymore, and Javier wasn't going to let him be. Days turned into weeks, and the letter became a silent bond between Elias and Javier. They didn't talk about it directly, not in the chaos of the ear, but it was there, in the glances they exchanged, in the way Javier stayed close during the worst shifts. Elias felt lighter, somehow, knowing someone carried his truth with him. But the fear remained, a constant hum beneath his skin. What would happen if the letter got out? If the hospital knew? Mercy General was a microcosm of the world, progressive in some corners, unforgiving in others. Elias had heard the whispers, the casual slurs tossed around in the locker room, the way some doctors dismissed patients like the young gay couple from weeks ago. He'd spent years building his reputation as the unflappable Dr. Carter. Would it all crumble if they knew? Javier, meanwhile, was wrestling with his own demons. He wanted to be brave, to live openly, but the letter had stirred up his own fears. He thought of his family, of the hospital's politics, of the patients who might look at him differently. But every time he saw Elias, saw the quiet strength behind his pain, Javier felt a pull to be Moretto, be himself, and to help Elias do the same. One night, during a rare lull, Javier found Elias in the hospital chapel, a small room tucked away on the third floor. Elias was sitting in a pew, staring at the flickering candles, the letter in his hands. Javier slid in beside him, their shoulders brushing. "You keep carrying that thing around," Javier said softly. "You ever think about letting it go?" Elias's fingers tightened on the envelope. "Every day," he admitted. "But then I think about what it'd mean. The looks. The questions. I've seen what happens to people who don't fit in." Javier nodded, his own memories flashing his cousin's wedding, where he'd dodged every "when's your turn" question, the bar where he'd kissed a guy and then checked over his shoulder for weeks. "I get it," he said. "But hiding's not living. Elias, you wrote that letter for a reason." Elias looked at him, his eyes searching. "What if I'm not strong enough?" "You are," Javier said, his voice fierce. "You've saved lives in this place for 15 years. You're stronger than you know." For a moment, they sat in silence, the candles casting soft shadows across their faces. Then Elias did something he hadn't done in years. She reached for Javier's hand, his grip tentative but real. Javier squeezed back, his heart racing. It wasn't a declaration. Not yet. But it was a start. The next day, the ER was a storm again. A mass shooting downtown brought in a flood of victims, and Elias and Javier were in the thick of it, their personal moment buried under the weight of the crisis. But as they worked, something had changed. They moved with a new rhythm, a trust that went beyond colleagues. When Elias faltered, Javier was there, steadying him. When Javier froze, Elias's voice cut through, guiding him. By the end of the shift, They were exhausted, blood and sweat staining their scrubs. In the locker room, as they changed, Javier caught Elias's eye. "We're doing this, right?" he asked, his voice low. "You and me. Whatever comes next." Elias nodded, a small smile breaking through. "Yeah," he said. "We are." The bond between Elias and Javier grew quietly, like a seed taking root in rocky soil. They didn't talk about the letter again, but it was always there, a silent promise. They started spending time together outside the hospital coffee runs, late-night diner talks, moments stolen from the chaos of their lives. Elias found himself laughing more, the weight of his secret easing with every shared glance, every brush of Javier's hand. But the hospital was a different world. Elias still wore his mask, deflecting personal questions, keeping his distance. Javier, too, stayed guarded, his own fears keeping him from pushing too hard. They were both still learning how to trust, how to step into the light. One evening, a new patient changed everything. A young trans woman, Mia, was brought in after a brutal assault. Her face was swollen, her ribs cracked, but her spirit was unbroken. She clutched Elias's hand as he examined her, her voice steady despite the pain. "They didn't like who I am," she said, "but I'm not sorry for being me." Elias felt her words like a punch. He worked with quiet precision, cleaning her wounds, ordering scans, but his mind was racing. Mia's courage, her refusal to hide, mirrored the letter in his locker, the one he still hadn't shared. Javier, assisting, caught Elias's eye, and they shared a look that said everything. After Mia was stabilized, Elias found Javier in the break room. "She's braver than I've ever been," Elias said, his voice thick. "She's out there, living her truth, and I'm still hiding." Javier leaned closer, his voice soft but firm. "You're not hiding anymore. Not with me. And maybe that's the first step." Elias nodded, his throat tight. He wanted to believe it, but the fear was still there, a shadow he couldn't outrun. That night, as they left the hospital together, Javier stopped him in the parking lot. "Come over," he said, his voice tentative but warm. Let's talk. Away from all this." Elias hesitated, then nodded. At Javier's small apartment, they sat on the couch, the city lights spilling through the window. Javier talked about his life, his dreams of being a nurse practitioner, his love for salsa dancing, the family he missed but couldn't fully be himself with. Elias listened, then shared his own story, his first crush at 16, the fear that kept him silent, the years of loneliness that followed. As the night deepened, their words grew quieter, their hands closer. When Javier leaned in, his lips brushing Elias's, it felt like a dam breaking. The kiss was tentative at first, then desperate, years of pent-up longing spilling out. When they pulled apart, Elias was trembling, but not from fear. "I've wanted that for so long," he whispered. Javier smiled, his eyes bright. "Me too." But the moment was fleeting. The next day, a rumor started circling the hospital someone had seen Elias and Javier together, leaving the parking lot, their hands brushing. By lunchtime, the whispers were everywhere. Elias felt the eyes on him, the weight of judgment he'd feared for years. He wanted to run, to hide, but Javier's steady presence kept him grounded. "We'll face it together," Javier said, his voice unwavering. Elias nodded, but the fear was back, sharper than ever. The rumors spread like wildfire, fueled by the hospital's gossip mill. Elias felt exposed, his carefully built walls crumbling. Colleagues he'd worked with for years now looked at him differently, some with curiosity, others with judgment. He overheard a nurse muttering in the break room. Didn't think Carter was that way. The words cut deeper than he'd expected. Javier, too, felt the pressure. A senior doctor cornered him, asking pointed questions about his friendship with Elias. Javier brushed it off, but the encounter left him shaken. He'd spent so long hiding, and now the choice was being taken from him. But every time he saw Elias, saw the fear in his eyes, Javier knew he couldn't back down. They leaned on each other, finding strength in stolen moments, shared coffee, a quiet talk in the chapel. But the tension was building, and Elias knew he couldn't keep the letter hidden forever. It was a ticking bomb, and the hospital's reaction to the rumors only proved it. One night, a crisis forced the issue. A patient, a prominent local pastor, was brought in after a heart attack. Elias and Javier worked together to stabilize him, their hands steady despite the storm inside them. As they stepped out of the trauma bay, the pastor's wife approached, her face tight with gratitude and suspicion. "I saw you too," she said, her voice low. "You're more than colleagues, aren't you?" Elias froze, his heart pounding. Javier stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "We're professionals, ma'am. We're here to save lives." She nodded, but her eyes lingered, judgmental. Later, in the break room, Elias was shaking. "This is it," he said. "This is what I was afraid of." Javier took his hand, uncaring who saw. "Let them talk," he said. "You're not alone anymore." But the encounter pushed Elias to a breaking point. That night, he made a decision. He pulled the letter from his locker, its edges worn from years of being carried. He added a new paragraph, his hand shaking as he wrote, "I'm done hiding. I've spent 15 years saving lives, but I haven't lived my own. If you're reading this, know that I'm not ashamed anymore. I'm proud of who I am, and I'm in love with a man who sees me for me." He sealed the envelope and left it on the nurse's station, addressed to the entire staff. It was reckless, terrifying, but it felt right. Javier found him there, his eyes wide. "You sure about this?" he asked. "No," Elias admitted, a small smile breaking through. "But I'm done being afraid." The next morning, the letter was gone. Someone had taken it, and by midday, copies were circulating. Elias braced himself for the fallout. But what came was unexpected. Nurses stopped him in the hall, offering quiet support. A young resident hugged him, tears in her eyes, saying, "Thank you for being brave." Even the hospital's gruff chief of staff pulled him aside, saying, "You're a damn good doctor, Carter. That's what matters." But not everyone was kind. Some colleagues avoided him, their silence louder than words. Elias felt the sting, but Javier was there, his hand on Elias's shoulder, his presence a steady anchor. The letter changed everything. Mercy General was never the same, and neither was Elias. The hospital buzzed with talk, but the support outweighed the judgment. Colleagues he'd barely spoken to shared their own stories of hidden identities, of loved ones they'd lost to prejudice. The letter had cracked open a door, letting light into places long kept dark. Elias and Javier grew closer, their relationship no longer a secret. They faced the whispers together, their hands clasped in the parking lot, their laughter louder than the gossip. Elias started to live, really live, for the first time in years. He brought Javier to staff parties, introduced him as his partner, and felt the weight of his past lift with every step. But the real impact came from the patients. Mia, the trans woman from weeks ago, returned for a follow-up, her smile bright. "I heard about your letter," she said to Elias. "You gave me hope." Others followed patients who'd felt invisible, who saw in Elias's courage a reason to keep going. The hospital became a safer space. Not perfect, but better, because one man had dared to be himself. One evening, a year later, Elias and Javier stood outside Mercy General, the city lights glittering around them. Elias held a new letter, one he'd written to himself. "You did it," it read. "You lived your truth, and you loved without fear." He didn't need to carry it anymore. He tore it up, letting the pieces scatter in the wind. Javier watched, his hand in Elias's. "You okay?" he asked, echoing that first question from so long ago. Elias smiled, his eyes bright with tears. "Yeah," he said. "I'm more than okay." They walked into the night, together, their hearts full. The hospital stood behind them, its doors still swinging, its chaos unrelenting. But inside, something had shifted. Elias's letter had shattered hearts. Yes, but it had also mended them, stitching together a community that was learning to love a little more fiercely, a little more openly, because of one man's courage.